Okay, well,
Hello.
good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session on supercharging your e-commerce fulfillment. And this is all about scaling up your business with smart warehouse processes. And it's an interesting topic that we'll be covering today, particularly given the time that we're in as we've all navigated through COVID-19 and the unique challenges that has brought, but particularly in the space of e-commerce and fulfillment. We've certainly heard many stories, both good and bad, as organisations have wrestled with the significant changes in demand and in many cases, significant growth that's been achieved throughout this time. So plenty of fertile ground to explore in terms of how organisations are handling that growth and maximising the opportunity that exists, and I'm sure will continue to exist into the future. Joining me for today's conversation is Andrew Clark. Andrew is the founder and managing director of Logistics Help, which is an organisation that works with SMEs in particular to optimise their logistics systems with a very clear focus on unlocking the value that is trapped within your supply chain. So welcome and good morning, Andrew.
Thanks, Angus.
Also joining us today is Orson Tonkin, the head of supply chain and logistics at Booktopia. Orson has a really strong background in supply chain operations across a number of organisations prior to Booktopia, also at organisations such as Iconic, and I'm sure Orson will add a great bit of value with a particularly practical view around what's happening out in supply chains across Australia. So welcome, Orson.
Thank you.
And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Angus McDonald. I'm the CEO of Barbecues Galore, and I'm also part of the advisory board here at Nora. And it's my pleasure to be able to guide everybody through the conversation here today. A couple of quick operational points, just as you're working through the discussion today. If there are any questions that you may have, you can post them through the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you can just type those questions in there. We will, throughout the course of the discussion, if we can cover off any questions as they come up, we'll certainly try to take those as we work through. But we'll also, hopefully with a little bit of time at the end of today's discussion, have the chance to answer some more questions. So please, if you do have any questions, we look forward to reviewing those as they come through. So look, just to get the conversation kicked off, and I guess picking up on some of the themes that we've introduced a little moment ago there, many e-commerce businesses have really had to scale up quickly during 2020. It'd be really interesting to start with you, Andrew, in terms of understanding your perspective on some of the logistics issues that organisations have had to confront throughout this time and how they've had to handle that scaling up that the opportunities presented. So over to you to start us off, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Angus. So, it really depends on where you're at in terms of your business and its growth. So many e-commerce businesses literally start in the garage, and it's just, it's one guy or a couple of people, husband, wife team, whatever, and they are picking and packing their own orders and just buying stock and just getting it out. So the thing is, in the garage, most people organise their warehouse or their garage warehouse pretty much like a kitchen pantry. So you group like products together and you store them on whatever shelving you have, and you just make it work. And because it's small and because you know everything and you can see everything, then it's pretty straightforward. You don't need sophisticated systems. You just need essentially a list of what people need to get, and then you go and pick it and you ship it and you send it by Australia Post typically. But once you get out of the garage and you start to scale, then sometimes what can happen is you take your garage processes and you put them into a bigger site, and then cracks start to appear in the process, and you find that maybe you bring one or two people into the operation. You give them 5 minutes worth of training, and then away they go, and then they make some errors, and suddenly you can't find things, and someone's put the stock somewhere else, and you start to find issues. You run out of stock, which is really a supply management issue, or you receive stock and the person who received it yesterday is now away, or they're casual and 2 days a week, and now you don't know where the stock is. So you find you can't find the stock, and then people are wandering around your now much bigger warehouse trying to find stock. The order fulfillment slows down, you get mistakes, and you start to get some real problems. So as the business scales up, you often reach a point of crisis, and that's often where I will come into to help with the business, which is where they realise that they might be all over their marketing. In fact, indeed, been very successful at marketing into their niche, and the orders are flowing through, but they're not logistics experts, they're not warehousing experts, and so they hit issues and start have failures in their fulfillment. So at that point, then they might go, well, why don't we outsource it? And they send it out to a 3PL. That may go really well, or it may not go well. It depends upon how the competence of the 3PL that they outsource to, because the 3PL market for e-commerce is still an emerging one, and not everyone is expert in dealing with the high volume, small order picking and packing processes that go on. So sometimes, and I've heard a few stories where e-commerce businesses, they've outsourced and then they've brought it back in-house because it just didn't work. They found their service was going down. They were losing connection with the customers, and so they brought it back. But doing it themselves, it's still slow and expensive because they don't have the expertise. So in order to scale up, yeah. So Orson, do you want to make some comments on that?
Yeah,
I think just to add to that, Orson, I think, you've got obviously a very different perspective as an organisation. It's probably further along in the maturity than some of the examples that Andrew's used a moment ago. But I'm sure no less you've had to contend with some pretty significant growth over recent months, and it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so look, the short answer is yes, it's a different level, but the reality is principles are the same. For me, it always comes back to three things. It's people, place, and process. So you need to have, to Andrew's point, the right people. So it's really hard to find good people. So that's for us is partnering with a couple of labour hire companies that we use, and obviously making sure that they give them a really tight brief of who we're after. So the other part is having your suppliers. So packaging. Packaging is a massive thing, especially when you're working at big numbers and trying to make sure that you've got enough packaging. That is super critical. You can have a mountain of stock and you can have a mountain of orders, but if you've got nothing to pack it with, it's not going to get to the customer. And then obviously the last piece is the stock side of things, which is the place. And that comes back to demand planning, engaging with your marketing guys, making sure you know or have as much as you can, because you never really know, because the customer can be fickle sometimes, and having a good plan on what it is, and then having a fallback plan if things don't materialize in that way. So yes, the answer is it's at a much higher level. So for us, yes, we've grown quite significantly during COVID, but I still think the principles are the same no matter what level your organization's at.
Yeah. I think one of the key things that people need to keep in mind is that you really need to design effective processes for your business. And a lot of businesses don't consciously design the process. They just sort of, evolve out of common practice. But you need to embrace process design versus dependence on people. So once you get an effective process and you can train staff into that process, and then you've got to maintain the operational discipline to make sure that everyone is following the process correctly. And then once you have an effective process in place, and this applies at whatever level you're doing this, once you have an effective process, you can then start to apply more sophisticated technology to allow you to develop more efficient processes and that work at higher volume, because volume is really what drives the need for technology and more efficient process.
And Andrew, I think something which, if I think about my own experience in working in different organisations as we've managed with the kind of growth that we've achieved through e-commerce along the way there, and typically when you're getting a relatively high rate of growth, whatever you put in place a year ago, you quickly outgrow it. And I think that sort of continuous resetting of the horizon from, okay, well, yes, that worked a year ago. Yes, that worked 6 months ago, but having that ability to say that, okay, well, we get to draw a line under that now and sort of set a new horizon about what that next step in sophistication is. I think that is another area that I think a lot of people sometimes wrestle with, which is, okay, well, we just spent a lot of time and money fixing our supply chain, but, we've had another 70% growth or whatever it might be. And suddenly we've got to go back and revisit some of the things that might have worked for where we were at that stage in the journey, but certainly now need a resetting of that horizon. Any thoughts on that one, Andrew?
Oh, definitely. So your process design and the technology. So there's a kind of a dance, I think, between process design and the technology, because more modern technology, more sophisticated technology enables more sophisticated and more efficient processes. But that also comes with a price. So if you want to scale up your business, you need to have sufficient volume and apply an appropriate level of technology to give you the right sort of processes for your current scale. There's no point spending $1 million on some sort of advanced automation system if you simply don't have the volume that is going to justify the return on that investment. So this is when people start, literally when they are in the garage, everything is a manual process, and there is almost no technology support other than printing out the order from the back of the web store. But as you go along, you're going to apply better technology. But if I can just come back to the process design thing for a sec, I want to highlight the importance, the key difference that the transition the business has to make from people dependence to process dependence, because a lot of businesses, particularly in the SME world, they're very dependent on their people. And the problem with that is that it doesn't scale. So because there isn't a clearly defined process that everyone follows and that is trained out, consistently applied throughout the business. So what happens when you scale up a people-dependent business is that you get all of those sort of issues that I was talking about before, where the cracks start to appear and the orders go out wrong and late and everything takes too long, and suddenly you spend a lot of time fixing mistakes because you brought new people into the business that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and Orson, obviously you've been with a couple of different e-commerce organisations that have very much been through this journey, and some of them to be quite large e-commerce businesses. Any sort of observations on that journey of growth?
Yeah, so for me, it's the best part of my job, right? That's what I like, what I do. It's the way I solve a problem today is not the way I solve it in 6 months, but I've got to have an eye to the horizon to say, how can I build or evolve this process to meet my needs right now, but also have flexibility so when the time comes, I can then scale it by another 30%, 40%, 50%. And you're playing chess is effectively what it is. Like, you've got to be 2 to 3 moves ahead, so you know where you're going with. And for me, that involves basically engaging with the business owners and having a good understanding of where we're going to go in a capital investment program and the like, to be able to help to scale where it is. And obviously that comes back to them ultimately as their business saying, where are you going? Where's the goalpost? And let's aim to beat that goalpost. So I try and work backwards from that to be able to say, if that's the goal, I need to be able to do this at this point, this at this point, that at that point, and then the processes evolve and they get designed to meet those needs. And then how does it scale from A to B to C? And usually that's through progressively adding certain layers to be able to achieve what you need.
Yeah, and so I think that really sort of neatly fits into our next question, which sort of now talks to the resetting of customer expectations, particularly around speed. And I think we've seen many stories, and anybody who's fulfilling product in or out of Victoria would know about the significant challenges around Australia Post in that market at the moment. And I think entirely understandable given what's happened, but nonetheless an illustration of the fact that customers' expectations, regardless of those situations, certainly expect better than that. Needing to make sure that you can handle those or address those bottlenecks that might exist in different points along the journey. Thinking about the last 6 months, what processes really, and you talked to process a little bit before, Orson, but what processes are particularly important to make sure that you can maintain that speed of fulfillment and continue to live up to customer expectations? Maybe starting with you, Andrew.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, number one is matching supply to demand. Your warehouse is not doing anything if it doesn't have the stock. So now that's not a warehouse process, that is a supply management process, and that's an entirely different conversation. But that's really is the base level that you've got to have in place. You've got to have good supply management processes in place so that you have the stock. Beyond that, so if I was going to kind of pick the top few things that I'd be doing for an SME that's kind of getting out of the garage and really is trying to get their head around the first steps in actually running an efficient warehouse operation, the number one would be location management within the warehouse. So instead of storing products in family groups, the like products together, or books are over there and drinks are over there and calculators are over there. Instead of doing that, you then go to, well, I have an XYZ coordinate system within my warehouse. I've got racking. It's, there are racks and bays, and there are levels, and there are slots within bays. And I put a numbering system onto that. And now instead of tracking inventory simply by product code, and I know that, those products are over there, you can now track it by a location marker, which you track in the system. Now, not all systems provide location management, and some provide only a single location per product. Some provide multi-locations per product. So there are different capabilities within different systems, and this is where it comes down to that technology and scaling thing that I was talking about before. Once you've got location management, you can start going to directed put away for your on your receiving process, so that you make sure the product goes where it's meant to go within the warehouse. And then you can track products around multiple locations. So you can do that if you've got a one location per product system. You can still do that manually on index cards, so that you can track your bulk reserve stock, because a lot of the time people have the problem where there's one location in the system, you go to that location and the stock's not there, but you've got 3 pallets of it, or X number of boxes of it in reserved locations somewhere else, but that's not in the system, so you don't know where it is. So, but you need to know where it is if you're going to track location. So you can track that manually, and then you can replenish that pick phase from the reserved storage, so that you primarily are picking from one location, and you start to get control over your travel path around the warehouse. So that would be on the storage and the stock management side of things. Then on the picking side, again, starting off very simply, people usually pick one order at a time, or they grab a handful of pick slips and they walk around the warehouse and they pick 3, 4, 5 orders. But that quickly gets tricky. There's a limit to how many bits of paper you can hold in your hand and sort of effectively faff around with before you spend more time trying to work out where to go next than you do actually picking stock. So the next level would up from that in the paper-based process would be to use a batch picking, where you pick stock in a batch. So you pick a consolidated pick list from a number of orders, which might be 10 or 20 or 100, like just depends on the scale. And then you bring all that stock forward, and then you pack that out of that batch pick, and you picked exactly the right amount of stock to fulfill those orders. Then tied into that is the freight side of things. So if you get through that packing process and you're still doing manual data entry to key your consignments into the freight system, the next level is we want to have some sort of automation so that you can bring all of your consignment data from your orders into your freight management system, so you can print out your labels and stick them on the box. So all of that is going to depend upon the systems that you're actually using, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later.
Orson, from your perspective, I would sort of frame this another way and ask, what are the main bottlenecks? What are the killers of productivity and timely fulfillment in your view during any period of rapid growth?
It's usually when you're introducing change. So we're in the process of that right now. We're basically rolling out a fairly major project, and you have teething issues, right? Like it doesn't work the way that it worked on paper, is probably the best way of saying it. And it's about working through that as a process, and then being able to eventually you fight back, you get on top of it, and you get in front of it. So the short answer is, I think the original question, the answer would be it's a game of 2 halves, right? You've got what happens inside the warehouse and being able to execute in a timely fashion at a high level of accuracy. And the second half of it is actually engaging with your freight providers and making sure that you're across where they're having issues, so you can communicate that to your customer. Because there's nothing worse than you actually get the job done in sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes a day. And then Australia Post, we'll use them as an example, if Melbourne, being Melbourne having its challenges, it could take up to 2 weeks for a parcel to get there. The customer doesn't see that. The customer just goes, you let me down. And the reality is you didn't. You did everything that you were supposed to do, and it's just the mercy of the freight gods didn't want to play the game. But if you can be honest and communicate that up front, that's got to help eliminate a lot of that angst that the customer may have. So for me, I think it's definitely 2 halves that you need to consider, both what happens inside and then being across what's happening in that last leg to the last mile, so you can communicate that to the customer if and when required.
I think that's sort of an interesting linkage. The next question we've got really is for us to explore why it is that e-commerce is different from fulfillment is different from traditional fulfillment. And I think for me, the starting point is really a recognition that in traditional retail and therefore the traditional fulfillment processes that support them, the fundamental difference between that format of retail and e-commerce is that in an e-commerce instance, you've already taken the customer's money. And so anything short of a perfect experience is a disappointment. In a traditional retail format, you've got opportunities to try and adjust expectations or move the customer across to a different product. And so that absolutely is a big difference that puts a lot more pressure on consistency of execution. That's obviously heavily supported by technology. We've touched a little bit on that integration between the completion of the pick and pack process and how that translates into the freight part of the process and making sure that there's clarity of communication to the customer. Are there any other observations you'd make around the fundamental differences in thinking that people need to make when they consider how their supply chain supports e-commerce? I guess this is a particularly relevant conversation for people that are perhaps running a traditional retail model or a bricks and mortar model, where they may be more mature and established in that space, but are experiencing rapid growth in online just as much as it is for other pure play e-commerce retailers. Maybe starting with you again, Orson, on that one.
For me, I take your point that you've already taken the customer's money. I distill it down to even something simpler and say, in a distribution world, everything's a one, right? Where if I was replenishing your store, I'd be sending you 20 or 30, and that's what you'd order, and you'd have a pallet, you'd have a gross, all that type of stuff. E-commerce, it's a one. Everything's a one, right? So to Andrew's point earlier, where he was talking about replenishment, I can tell you now that Booktopia and the Iconic do not have replenishment. Replenishment is a swear word. It is a waste of money because there is no point having it in multiple locations and then having to move it, because guess what? I'm going to pick it as a one. So put it on the shelf, have the system know where it is, direct the picker to it, and you pick it everything as one. You distill it down to its simplest factor. That is it. How you group it, how you batch it. Yep, you can get really smart, really technical, and if you're really good at it, you can save a lot of cash. But the reality is, it's one.
Andrew, your thoughts on that?
So yeah, and this also goes to the early question around where outsourcing sometimes is problematic. There is there's almost like a dividing wall in the supply chain world there, where you've got the new world of online retail, and you've got the traditional supply chain of wholesale and retail distribution. And those are very different worlds, because in the wholesale world, if you're a manufacturer, you're shipping pallets loads and bulk cases out to the wholesalers. If you're a wholesaler, you're shipping, depending upon the size of your retail store, maybe a pallet, half a pallet, maybe some cases, or maybe many pallets in the case of like a supermarket replenishment, but it is bulk distribution. And the entire supply chain up until a few years ago was entirely geared towards that. And in fact, that is the dominant supply chain at the moment. So that bulk distribution is like a world apart from, as Orson says, the each picking, the unit picking that you get in online retail, where you're going direct to the customer. Typically, an online retail order is 1 to 3 things that a customer has ordered online. So you go from shipping a pallet load, which is a reasonably straightforward activity, to shipping 1,000 orders, all with 1 to 3 units on them. And so the labor cost per order is just dramatically goes up. The processes that you need to actually pick and pack and get that out effectively, cost effectively, are very, very different. And that is why the outsourcing experience often doesn't go well, because the 3PLs, a lot of them have just not caught up. They're trying to put e-commerce fulfillment into a traditional supply chain warehouse, and it becomes a problem. So you really need to make sure that the processes for your warehouse for e-commerce are set up correctly. So that really is the key difference. That's why outsourcing doesn't always work. So you need to find a specialist, and you need to find a specialist who will work well for your product if you are going to outsource.
And I might come back to, I guess, the conversation about technology for a moment, because I do know, Andrew, that you are doing some work around warehouse management platforms or warehouse management systems. That is something that obviously, in a lot of organisations that are making that step up in maturity, if they haven't already made sure that their warehouse management system is fit for purpose in this different dynamic around how to manage an e-commerce supply chain. Did you want to talk us through that a little bit more at this point?
Sure, yeah. So the warehouse management systems are probably one of the most valuable and under-implemented technologies that are around today. They have such a massive impact on the productivity of a warehouse. You can get away without one if you're in the traditional supply chain world because your order volume is much lower. But in the e-commerce world, once you get any kind of volume whatsoever, a warehouse management system is almost, in fact, it does become an essential thing that you need to have if you're going to scale up and you're going to manage your own distribution. So we've been working for a few years now with a business called Upimium. We're a reseller of their warehouse management system. That came out of a developer, a local Australian developer who worked for many years with HighJump warehouse management system. He used to be an implementer for that. HighJump left the market during the GFC and he started developing his own warehouse platform. That got in use at one of his key clients at City Beach in Brisbane, where it's currently in use in over 100 user warehouse there. We've done some implementations with 3PLs and e-commerce businesses in Sydney, but it's traditionally been an on-premises piece of software. So the key change that for me is very exciting is that we're launching our own cloud-hosted version of that software. So the Upimium warehouse management system is now available in the cloud in the multi-tenant environment. So that enables us to scale the size at which we can actually do an effective, cost-effective warehouse management system implementation down to about sort of 5 users. Whereas previously, really, you wanted sort of 10 to 20 users in your warehouse before that would be a really cost-effective implementation. So we can host it in the cloud now, and that can be a dedicated cloud. So more and more businesses are going to cloud for all of their applications. So they're interested. They don't have servers anymore. They're not interested in doing that. So we can have a dedicated cloud-hosted environment for the WMS as well. And so it is a sophisticated system. It has a mobile application that runs on Android or in any browser. I'll just give you a quick, can I share my screen just for 1 second? I'll just show you very quickly what the system looks like. Let me just do that.
I have a question asking the name of it again, so you might want to mention it, Andrew.
Yeah, Upimium. Upimium is the name of the software. So there, that is. All right. So you should see now this is the administration user interface here. Just looking at a stock inquiry, and this is the application. This is the mobile application. So this runs in a browser or in an app on an Android device. All of the industrial devices are going to Android now. So you would scan a location. I'll just type that in. And it's very simple and easy to engage with user interface. This is just doing a stock inquiry. So you can run through and you can see pictures of the items on the screen, and you can run through all of the different products that are on the screen there. So that's just a very quick look at what the system looks like. And obviously we can talk, I can talk more about that to people who are interested in pursuing that. But I think the key message here really is that this technology is bringing very sophisticated warehouse management systems that run large distribution centers to small e-commerce businesses who are starting to scale up and making a key technology that is an enabler of scaling and growth available to any business that doesn't have that technology already.
And so, yeah, look, I think it's a really interesting shift around how cloud-based technology is making some of these really sophisticated systems much more accessible to all sizes of organizations, not just those that can afford significant capital investment. Nonetheless, though, regardless of how big your organization is, there's a job that needs to be done around how you develop a business case for any sort of investment in your business. And we've actually got a question from one of the audience actually for Orson, just asking your thoughts around how you can actually help. You mentioned a little bit earlier on about the way you're engaging with the directors or owners of a business to guide them around making these investments. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts around how you help to drive those discussions inside your organisation.
Yeah, the short answer is it's a lot of math, but basically the longer answer is it's about, you need to understand your current process, you need to understand your current capability, then you need to look at what do you want to propose, what is that going to translate into, and effectively it boils down into, there's two main pressure points you want to look at, for lack of a better term, or levers that you want to pull. The first one's going to be, you should give me money to do this because I can save you on wages, and it's going to be X. That's going to help determine your return on invest. The second one's going to be, you have this great target you're going to grow into. Right now we can't. Here's how we can. So therefore you can achieve additional sales. So you're looking at either lost sales opportunity, or you're looking at a reduced labor cost at a unit level. Those two, that's effectively, it boils down into those two numbers. And if you can tick both of those boxes, usually the business owner's got to say, I want to do that because that's going to help me get to where I want to be, and I'm going to have more money in my back pocket.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting thought around putting business cases together. And often you've got people from operational areas of the business who really understand the operational imperative for getting a piece of capability into their organisation, but sometimes battle with how to frame that in a way that I guess can appeal to other parts of the organisation. You know, it's got to get past the CFO before it gets to anybody else, and that can be a challenging journey. But Orson, obviously, you've got some thoughts on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, usually and every organization's different. You need to understand the political landscape, for lack of a better term. So usually there are certain people that you go through and you get them on board, and it builds momentum before it actually gets to the decision makers. So yes, usually you want to be really good friends with the guys in accounts and finance that can say, yep, I agree that this is going to save us money. That usually ticks that box. And then you basically get, usually the next one's got to be the IT guys, because they're going to have to do a bit of work to make sure that it all gets integrated and done correctly. And they're going to have to say, yes, I can do that. And usually if you can tick those couple of boxes, then all of a sudden it becomes fairly academic and going from there.
Anything you'd add to that, Andrew?
Yes, there's usually a lot of spreadsheets involved. So yes, it's all about the return on investment. So the way I do this sort of work is to dive into the activities that are going on in the warehouse, and you really want to be able to say, well, if we do this instead of that, that's going to take so many heads out of the system because we're not doing that anymore. We've got a machine that's doing it, or we expect that, you know, if you, for example, going from single order picking to batch picking, or to multi-batch picking in a WMS, where you've got a really very clever and effective picking process. We think that's probably going to cut double the picking productivity. So cut the labour for picking in half. So that represents a certain amount of dollars, right? It's just simple salary. There's always other benefits as well that are more qualitative. You may get improvements in accuracy, reduction in errors. So you kind of got to add those things up and figure out what that is worth in dollar terms, because the people who sign the checks are the ones who sort of think in dollar terms. So if they see that value proposition there and you can make a good case, you start to turn that into reality. That is always the challenge at the other end. And Orson, I think you made an excellent comment earlier on where you said that the paper versus the reality can sometimes be a little bit different, and you know, it takes real work to do the implementation.
The other thing I'd add to that is when it comes to, you know, putting forward business cases for particularly investment in supply chain capability, often you'll have different people, particularly you know, from the vendors that are trying to present products, will often try to present numbers that include a sales uplift, and obviously use that to help present the argument for a significant return on investment. My advice to anybody within organisations that are putting business cases together is be very careful about doing that, because typically there's two things. Well, there's one thing that's very certain, is that when you spend more money, you definitely spend it. When you assume you're going to generate more revenue because of some improved experience, it's a little bit more subjective. And while obviously I'm sure we would all hope that's the case, I think if you want to put a compelling business case forward for investment in this sort of capability, always start with the productivity improvement you're able to provide back to the organisation, which becomes a tangible reduction in cost per order. That's usually pretty compelling, and there's a lot more certainty around that, which for the finance people in your organisation, I'm sure they'll probably warm to that much more than something else. So anyway, just a thought on that particular topic. Another area, I guess, and Andrew, you mentioned this a little bit earlier on, that retailers often consider in this space, and there's been a couple of questions that have come through about different 3PL providers. I don't think it's helpful for us to address any comments or questions about particular organisations, but there are certainly some real horror stories that have come from outsourcing for fulfilment through to 3PL providers. As much as at the same time, there's also been some good stories of those who've done it well. I saw an example just yesterday of a listed retailer that in their announcement have actually moved to a 3PL operated facility that they're working on. So it's certainly still a very real option that many people will consider as part of their equation. I guess the important thing is to make sure that people are going into it eyes wide open. What are your thoughts, Andrew, on the comparison between running your own facility and engaging a 3PL provider, recognising that you'd have to spend a lot of time to make sure you pick the right one for your business?
Yeah, I think that, the initial question is, should you outsource, right? So, and that is the question. So I talked about the crisis point that people get when they start to scale up. So if you hit that crisis point, you go, you know what, I can't handle this. I don't want to do it, and let me go find a provider. So if you're absolutely in that camp where it's just, you're going, I don't want to run my own warehousing, I don't want to do my own distribution, then you need to go to the market and do a proper market review. You need to understand the capabilities of the 3PL. 3PLs often have niches that they work in. So you'll get someone who's good in fashion, for example, or you get someone who's good at food, or someone who's good at pharmaceuticals, right? So just depends upon on where their weight of business is. And then so what they will do, they'll develop expertise and capability within a particular industry niche. So if they have that, that is a very good sign. They have a proven track record of success in a particular area. I would not outsource my e-commerce business to a 3PL that was a traditional supply chain model only, and they had not done e-commerce before. That is doomed, right? That is just simply not going to work. So then it's a case of, well, if I'm looking at the available pool of e-commerce 3PLs, which one looks like it can do the sort of work that is related to my business? Maybe I've got fancy packaging, and the way the product looks and presents to the customer is really, really important to me. And I go out and I see a 3PL, and all they do is stick it in standard plain brown boxes, and they just ship it out the door, and they don't really care. I'm not interested in doing the fancy packaging. But you find someone else who can do that. So you find someone who matches the profile, who can service your business really well. And you must take the time to make that decision very well. Now, having said that, the point I would make is that 3PLs have to make money. If you do the warehousing yourself well, you can do it cheaper than outsourcing. So it can come down to a question of will. There are circumstances where you have to outsource. For example, you launch into the US market, for example, right? You're going to be working with a 3PL because you're not going to set up a warehouse in the US. Maybe you ship over to Perth, so you want to have a 3PL over in Perth to service that Western Australian area because you just can't do it effectively from Sydney. But if you can run it yourself and you do it well, it will be cheaper than outsourcing, and it will be better, and you'll get a better result. But you need to apply the expertise, you need to apply the technology into your own business. And if you make that investment, then it will absolutely pay dividends, because you will, to my sign over my shoulder there, you will outcompete the competition, right? And all markets are competitive, because you'll simply outservice them, and you'll deliver a better result because you have that direct connection with the customer. Your staff are literally putting the product together that is going to go into the customer's hands. And so it's about control and service.
Yeah, Orson, your thoughts on the question of 3PL and when it works and when it doesn't?
Short answer is I should be politically correct and say that I don't believe in it because I basically work for a company that does their own warehousing. But the reality is that I don't believe it can always be bad. It can be a good thing, but I agree with what Andrew said. You have to do the due diligence. You've got to find someone who can actually do what you want. You need to be able to effectively, you've got to find a partner. I wouldn't see it as someone that's offering me a service. I'd see it as a partnership to be able to grow together because that's what e-com's about, especially at the moment. So I don't think it's a simple set and forget. I think you need to be able to find someone you can work with and actually grow through.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. That really brings about the question of partnership, which I think is really important here. And if there's an observation I could make, that when these things typically go wrong is when there isn't a good level of alignment in the partnership between the service provider and the organisation that's engaging that service provider. When it works very well is when there's a really good strategic alignment and a good integration where that 3PL service provider in effect acts as if they're an extension of your organisation, where the only clue that they don't work for you is that they don't happen to have your logo embroidered on their shirt, that they operate as if they are part of your business. And a good partnership, you should be able to get that seamless experience from selling the product and completing the transaction on your e-commerce platform through to a fulfillment process that's quite efficient and effectively connected and delivers an experience to the customer where they shouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two, versus a relationship where it's more of okay, well, we complete this part of the transaction, we then send that on to this other organisation and we sort of stand back and there's a bit of a misalignment between the two. I think typically that's where problems may happen. The other thing, of course, in terms of the commercials around 3PL, which I think are important areas of consideration, is thinking about things like seasonality, where that may drive thinking about the level of capital investment you need to set up and operate a facility, which may only operate at a certain capacity some times of the year and at different times of the year. In effect, when you move to a 3PL model, you're basically shifting away from a fixed cost base to a fully variable cost base. Any other considerations that you think would be an important point to reflect on in making a decision like that, Andrew?
Sorry, just repeat that question again, Angus. I was just focusing on something else for a moment.
Well, I guess we're just talking about the different reasons why you may or may not consider engaging a 3PL. And I guess I've made a couple of examples where a 3PL may well fit your organisation, as much as, to back to your earlier point, Andrew, and Orson also touched on this as well, is that in a typical setting, when you've got a predictable pattern of demand, operating your own facility may well end up being a more efficient model. There will be arguments for both, depending on those situations. What are the important points that a retailer should consider if they're making the decision between operating their own facility or engaging a third-party provider to help them?
Okay, all right. So market obviously is a key thing, right? The market that you're going into, so that the physical characteristics of that market. So certainly overseas markets, then you're probably in 3PL territory, because it's just probably going to be out of your depth as far as setting up a warehouse is concerned. That still applies also in Australia. There may be physical constraints around the nature of your product, like big bulky items. You typically need to have a warehouse that is locally sourced. If you're, and I'm not sure what appliances online are doing, but if your appliances online and you've got fridges and stoves and things, then you're shipping them direct to customer out of a centralised warehouse in Sydney nationally is probably not going to work. You're going to need to have stock in local areas. So there are real physical constraints that definitely drive you towards outsourcing, if you can't, or it's just not practical for you to go out and set up your own warehouse. The other thing is, if you are rapidly scaling up, then managing your own warehouse capacity-wise then becomes a problem, because 6 months' time, you need a warehouse that's 3 times bigger than what you have now. And so you end up in this cycle of continuously moving warehouses. Whereas you get the right 3PL partner, they have a lot more capacity to scale up very quickly. So there are definitely real reasons why you would want to outsource.
You can also use it as a strategy to actually stepping stone while you're doing that as well, Andrew.
Absolutely, of course. The comment I make just on the cost side around doing it yourself versus outsourcing is if you're large and focused, right? So also in your context, Booktopia, right? Very specific product, high volume business, that makes sense to do it yourself. Because if you throw that into an outsource, then all you're doing is paying someone to run an operation that is probably going to essentially be a dedicated operation just for your business. And they got to read their margins. So you may as well, and often you can lose the innovation savings, right? So the 3PL innovates and they just keep that money and they just charge you, they continue to sort of cut their costs down and they just they just keep it, right? And they're charging you the same service. Okay, sure, you can renegotiate, right? You can absolutely do that. Or if you build in the right kind of contractual arrangements, you can make that work. But if I'm outsourcing to a 3PL, they have to build a generic warehouse, and their warehouse may be huge. And that's one of the reasons why the cost can be higher. Not only are they making a profit, but there's inherent inefficiencies in very large warehouses versus a small and focused warehouse where your travel distances are less. You can optimize it specifically for your product range. So you can do a whole bunch of things around optimizing your own warehouse, which your 3PL is simply never going to do. It goes in and it's in their system and it costs what it costs and you just pay. So I think those are probably some of the key considerations, which is, of doing it yourself versus outsourcing.
Just looking to some of the questions we've been getting from the audience as we've been talking, and I think there's a great one there, just looking into the future now. What do you think the key point of innovation in fulfillment will be in the future? So I think what's the next big thing that is going to transform or deliver the next major improvement in productivity or customer experience? Awesome. What are your thoughts there? Obviously, you're in an organisation that's already actively investing and doing a lot in this space. What do you see in the future?
Inside the shed, it's got to be around the introduction for us. It's got to be around looking to go down the pathway of AMRs and being able to basically optimize what's going on, be able to increase our storage density, being able to be more efficient. The biggest thing that I think is going to change in the next probably 10 years away is this thing. Right now, customer orders a product, it goes to an address. I honestly believe the last mile will evolve to hit a moving target. That's going to be pretty cool when it happens, but it's also going to make life really, really hard from an operational standpoint to be able to get it done in a timely fashion. It's all about speed and being able to get it there. But that's where I think this goes. And that means that the way that we operate today is not the way we're going to operate in the future. We're going to have to be faster. We're going to have to be leaner. We're going to have to work in probably smaller batches to be able to try and do it in a really timely fashion, similar to what I used to do at the Iconic with their 3-hour delivery, right? That was a very, very bespoke process. But 3-hour delivery for the Iconic means the fulfillment center had 9 minutes to get it picked, packed, into the courier. Right? That's where it's going.
Yeah.
Andrew, your thoughts on what's on the horizon?
So speed is obviously increasingly driving it, and so you've got voice shopping now is a thing, right? You can say, hey Google or hey Alexa or whatever, and go, bring me the latest iPhone, and then Amazon delivers it to you an hour later and just bills your account. Probably more and more of that kind of instant, urgent fulfillment is going to come our way, which means more 9-minute time windows for picking in the warehouse. That sort of speed is only going to happen at high scale with some sort of automation. Robotics within the warehouse are definitely coming in, and there's a million of those Amazon robotics competitors out there that are doing that sort of work now. We don't quite have pick pack robots yet, but they're coming. People are working on those sort of things. So eventually you may get a robot store person, or certainly robot assisted stores people, where the picker, the manual dexterity of a human being is very, very hard to replicate in robotics. But maybe you've got, there are already robotics out there where a little robot is following the picker around, and he picks into that box, and then it moves on to the next person. So you constrain the walking distance of the picker and then they put to a robot, and then the robot does the running around, and the picker, the human being who is required for that sort of manual dexterity, is is constrained. So goods to the man systems are absolutely the key thing, because there are things that a human being can do that is very, very difficult for a robot to do at the moment. That may change. I think there's a revolution coming in freight when you get full self-driving, and that will dramatically reduce the cost of freight, and that may well drive further speed and fragmentation in order size as well. Because if the cost of freight falls to trivial compared to the cost of the product, then people can order, to Orson's point, maybe they'll just order on their phone and you've got to catch up with them wherever they are, in an hour's time. So that would be a very, very interesting scenario. So I think that is going to have a huge effect on the supply chain when that comes.
Yeah, but I guess to my point, what I was saying earlier was, like, I think the majority of us are creatures of habit, right? Like, my phone is with me all the time, and I go to sort of the same 5 places throughout the course of the day fairly regularly at the same time frame. So I think the data being available has got to allow freight companies to be able to go, I know where you're going to be at the time my driver's going to be in that area, and that's where I'm going to hit you. That's where I think it evolves to.
Yeah, well, I think you have to say probably one of the greatest flaws of e-commerce is that it is basically built on a system designed to ship parcels to addresses between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday when people aren't home. And I think there's been some great examples around the world. I saw some trials. I think DHL were trialing car boot delivery and all sorts of different experiments. There are other organisations doing those sorts of things. I mean, internationally, Andrew, is there anything you're seeing out there in other parts of the world that you'd look to in terms of being best practice, or what's a great example of what's coming?
Okay, so here's one. HelloFresh, right? Delivering meals to homes. They essentially had to invent the after-hours fresh food delivery supply chain. It didn't exist, so they had to build one. So that, I think, is an example where after-hours delivery is going to be increasingly important, because people want things delivered to them when they're at home, because it just doesn't work, dropping things off during the day. I mean, the parcel lockers, that's there. That perhaps has not taken off in the way that I would have thought it was going to, but it's definitely, I think that'll still stay part of the landscape. But I think people want deliveries that they can actually just receive, in person at the time. So whatever is going to drive that after hours transport, crowdsourced freight is an extraordinary thing, right? The idea that, and this is a real danger for freight companies, the idea that I can just be a delivery person simply by signing onto an app and work for a few hours in the evening, picking up freight and delivering it to homes around my suburb or in neighbouring suburbs, and I would marginally cost that because I own the car, right? So I just go, I'm happy with a few dollars, $20 an hour. Or I've spoken to Uber drivers, they get like $28 an hour on average, something like that. And you go, well, does that pay for the car and and I've driven in some pretty nice cars with Uber drivers, and you're just sort of thinking, well, what is going on there? So individuals who are doing crowdsourced work don't think like businesses, and they don't cost things the same, and that drives the cost down. That's essentially what I'm saying. And that also opens up all sorts of opportunities. So I think that probably on the freight transport side, that's where things are going to go. The other comment I make is great technology and multi-million-dollar installations and automation. Fantastic, right? The cost of that will definitely come down over time. But we live in a world where 50% of the market, the distribution or more, is in the SME world, the market that I'm particularly sort of focused on. They barely have anything, right? They haven't implemented the technology that we have available now. They're still working through that process. The logistics expertise in that world is still very limited. So you get this stratification where you've got people like Booktopia at the top end putting in, massive multi-million-dollar investments to get the latest in technology and automation. And then you've got small businesses, with half a dozen people or 10 or 20 people within the business and a few people in the warehouse, and they're just picking on paper, right? They haven't even got to where we've got now. So there is a massive rollout that I think needs to happen in terms of the cloud technology that enables all of business to operate at a sophisticated and optimized level.
So look, one last question now. We've just got a couple of minutes remaining, but I think it's a great question to finish on. And, we've had some really good discussion about different levels of maturity across various sizes of organisation, from SMEs up to large and sophisticated organisations investing lots in robotics and all those sorts of systems and processes. Going back to the question about the smaller operators who are earlier in the journey, what would be the one thing that you'd say is a critical consideration? What's the starting point for those that are looking to make that next step around their logistics or their fulfillment strategy? Andrew, starting with you.
Well, if you're not already in the cloud and taking advantage of modern cloud business systems, that is absolutely where you need to be. There would be a heap of businesses that are running on a standalone PC version of MYOB or Reckon or something like that, right? So and they're paying nothing or very little for their software. If you want to join the 21st century and embrace the nature of where IT and the benefits that it can give you, because there's a massive payback for it, then in order to lift up your business and where it is, then you need to embrace cloud applications. Now, we're probably talking to online retailers here, so they're probably already in the cloud, right? They already have the web store, they'll have Xero. So the more these cloud applications are being rolled out, and as we said, now there's a warehouse management system that we can just plug into that ecosystem as well. That is only going to get more sophisticated and more advanced over time. So absolutely, the strategic direction in the IT is to move to the cloud and to take advantage of the latest technology and optimization that is available in the cloud to run your business.
Thanks, Andrew. And Orson, a final word on that question. Where would you suggest for a smaller business that's earlier in the journey, where should they start? Any key things they should think about when crafting their fulfillment strategy?
I would say keep it really simple and know what is the point that you exhaust yourself and you can't physically get it done anymore, and then knowing when you need to get help. So how many hours a day can you put into it? How many parcels does that actually get you? Does that fill the car that you can take to the post office if that's what you're doing? If not, at what point do you need to get someone to come and collect from your garage? Or if not, when can you get someone else to come and help you? That's what I'd say. I'd say keep it really simple, straightforward. Yes, all the conversation around the technology and that is valid, but I think you need to understand what you can do, more importantly, what you can't do. And then when you get to the point of where you exceed what you can do, how are you going to get some help to help you go to the next level?
And look, on that note, that just takes us to about the top of the hour. So thanks everybody for staying on the session. And there's been some good questions that have come through. So thanks again for sending those through. Thank you, Orson, for your part in the conversation. It's been really interesting to hear your perspective. And Andrew, thank you also. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and all the best.
Thanks, Angus.
Thank you.
Thanks, Orson.
Thank you.